A humble maid became the CEO's only remedy. One forbidden night left her carrying his baby. Have you ever wondered why the world is so quick to judge by what it sees, while completely ignoring the truth hidden beneath? A maid in worn clothes, a CEO in tailored suits. One carries silence like a burden, the other carries pride like armor. And yet, behind their facades lies a story far deeper than status, wealth, or bloodlines. A story of betrayal, sacrifice, and the kind of love no rumor could ever kill. She was just a poor orphan, mocked for daring to step into a house built on legacy. He was the heir everyone feared, untouchable, ruthless, and cold. Their union wasn't meant to be a fairy tale. It was a contract, a cure, a necessity wrapped in shame. But one forbidden night changed everything, binding their fates with a secret too powerful to be silenced. Whispers grew louder: gold digger, mistress, unworthy. Colleagues sneered, relatives plotted, enemies sharpened their knives. Yet in the middle of it all, a fragile heartbeat reminded her why she endured. It wasn't just survival anymore, it was dignity, it was truth, it was love fighting to exist in a world determined to erase it. Stay with us, because this isn't just another tale of the rich and the poor. This is about the girl who refused to break, the man who learned to kneel, and the child who became their redemption. What began as a contract will end as a legacy, and once you hear her story, you'll never forget the moment love conquered every lie. She was used to scrubbing other people's floors while the city slept, quiet, invisible, the kind of poor maid folks never really saw. By day, Lin Xinyi stacked plates in a back-alley diner. By night, she rushed to the orphanage that had once kept her warm. Rent was due, the deed was slipping, and the landlord's voice kept ringing like a countdown. Tell me, have you ever felt the walls closing in so fast you could hear your heartbeat in the plaster? The manager at the Velvet Lit Club didn't bother with pleasantries. VIP suite. He's important. Be gentle. There's a bonus. Important was just code for dangerous. Rich versus poor romance, please? There was no romance in debt notices and eviction trucks. Still, the number he whispered could buy 3 months of safety for 12 tiny beds, and the one woman who'd taught Xinyi to pray with her eyes open. The hallway smelled like citrus and spilled secrets. In the mirrored panel, she saw a girl with nervous hands and a spine that refused to bow, no matter how the world pressed. She knocked anyway. Inside, a man sat half in shadow, shirt undone at the collar, a glass untouched. The air around him felt colder, not because of the AC, but because power has a temperature, and it steals the warmth from the room. "Sit," he said, voice low, not cruel, just tired, like someone who hadn't slept since winter. "What do you want?" Xinyi answered with the only truth she owned. "Time for the children, for our home." He watched her like a jeweler reading flaws in light. Strange, isn't it, how a single look can weigh your soul as if it were currency? "Then make me forget tonight," he murmured, "and I'll make your problem disappear. A forbidden night is less about sin and more about signatures you can't erase." Xinyi stared at the door, at the soft exit she couldn't afford. She wasn't bargaining for designer shoes. She was bargaining for bunk beds and rice and a roof that didn't cry when it rained. She made a choice, the kind that burns on the way down. No kisses described, no fairy tale strings, just a transaction carved out of fear and fierce love. This was not a CEO love story yet, not the glossy kind. This was survival with trembling fingers, a prayer whispered into a stranger's quiet. You can judge her if you like, but tell me, what would you sell to buy 12 children tomorrow? Dawn bled through the blinds like a promise kept too late. He stood by the window, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. "Account number," he said, and she gave it, voice steady because hers had to be. The wire cleared. Proof pinged her cracked phone, numbers that looked like oxygen. He didn't ask her name, and she didn't offer it. Sometimes mercy wears a mask, so neither party has to flinch. Outside, the city yawned awake, buses coughing, markets opening like bright, noisy flowers. Jinyi walked fast, clutching that message like a lifeline, like it might dissolve if she blinked too long. Poor Maid, they'd call her. Maybe, but she'd been an orphan girl too, and love learned in empty rooms can be iron. Funny how the heart becomes a forge when there's nothing left to burn but yourself. By the time the sun cleared the glass towers, she'd already called the landlord twice, and the notary once. "Hold the deed," she pleaded, voice calm, words sharp. "Funds incoming." He laughed, then went silent when the bank confirmed. Isn't it wild how contempt loses its swagger the second your pockets make a sound? She reached the orphanage to find the children on the steps, hair tousled, eyes hopeful and half afraid. Mother Shen stood behind them, thin shoulders squared against a storm she couldn't outmuscle. Xinyi lifted the phone like a trophy. "We're safe, for now." The old woman's mouth wobbled, then firmed. Pride and relief are cousins who rarely hug in public. Inside, the air smelled of steamed buns and chalk. Xinyi washed her hands until the water ran clear, then helped serve breakfast as if the world hadn't tilted on its axis hours ago. She smiled for the kids, the kind that reaches only halfway to the eyes. Some nights take too much to be paid back in one sunrise, don't they? Alone in the storeroom, she pressed her forehead to cool metal and breathed until the guilt softened from a blade to a bruise. Betrayal and redemption aren't chapters, they're threads, twisting through the same rope. "It's done," she told the shelves, the mop, the stubborn dust. "It had to be." The words tasted like salt, but they held. When she finally stepped outside, the sky was the fragile blue of forgiveness. A breeze lifted the edges of her thrift store dress, and for a second she felt almost weightless, like a coin tossed and caught, still in the air, not yet decided. She didn't know his name. He didn't know her story. Somewhere in that gap, destiny shuffled a new deck. And yet, as the day warmed, a flicker crossed her body. A tiny dip in the gut, the kind you might blame on skipped sleep. She steadied herself on the gate, waited for the ground to stop swaying. Accidental pregnancy wasn't a phrase that belonged to morning chores. Still, fate has a dark sense of humor, and it rarely asks permission before it walks in. By evening, the children were laughing over paper cranes, and Mother Shen was humming old lullabies that stitched the room back together. Jinyi stood at the threshold, the wire receipt folded in her palm, the future folded right beside it. Engrasado como destino. No, strike that. Funny how fate opens a door and dares you to step through, even when your feet are bleeding. She looked up at the city's bright crown and felt the night looking back, unblinking. The price had been paid, the countdown reset. But the story? Oh, the story was just learning her name, and somewhere behind a high window a powerful CEO was memorizing the shape of a choice he couldn't forget. And what waited on the other side of that choice? Well, that's where the real trouble begins. Morning broke like mercy on a deadline. Lin Jinyi checked the bank app 3 times, then walked into the notary's office with a spine stronger than her shoes. A poor maid with a wire confirmation suddenly sounded like a person worth listening to. Paper stamped, deed paused, time, precious time, bought back from the edge. Strange how numbers can feel like oxygen when hearts are suffocating. At the landlord's desk, contempt curled like cigarette smoke. He named a higher figure. She named 12 children and a winter without blankets. He flinched. Greed does when it meets iron. The forbidden night flickered behind her eyes but didn't own them. "We're not asking for favors," she said. "We're paying our way." That's the only language men like him respect. Back at the orphanage, she fed rice into a cheap cooker and hope into brittle routines. Orphan girl love isn't poetry. It's bandaging knees, filing permits, and singing off-key so a room stops shaking. She rolled the deed copy into Mother Shen's palm. "We've got breathing room." The old woman nodded like a general who'd just been handed 1 more hour to hold the line. Xinyi pawned the last heirloom she had, 2 glass earrings that looked like rain when the light caught. "They're not real. The broker sniffed. Neither is security, she answered, smiling without teeth. The cash was small, but sacrifice works like compound interest. Pay enough of yourself now, and tomorrow might show up dressed as possibility. They stretched congee with sweet potato, and the kids made a game of finding the biggest orange cubes. Laughter bounced off chipped walls, turning poverty into a playground for 5 honest minutes. In those minutes, rich versus poor romance sounded like a bad joke told by people who never met the rent. Real love stood right here, sleeves rolled, counting bowls. City Hall smelled of paper dust and cold tea. A clerk peered over his glasses, skeptical of everything but his own signature. Ginny placed receipts like stepping stones. Transfer, escrow, tax. "You're thorough," he said. "We can be," she replied, "when the roof is on the line." He stamped the extension. Bureaucracy grudgingly shook hands with grit. Out on the curb, a developer's man leaned on a black sedan, smile slick as oil. "There are faster ways," he murmured, sliding a card toward her. "Mistress or wife, pick a lane, doors open quicker." She looked at the card, then at the children chasing a paper crane in the yard. "We already chose," she said, and let the wind take his card away. That evening, volunteers from the market arrived with crates of bruised vegetables and stories that tasted like belonging. They fixed the fence, rewired a flickering light, and pinned a hand-drawn calendar to the wall. An emotional love story, if you must call it that. Neighbors saving neighbors, God hiding inside dirty aprons and tired smiles. Betrayal and redemption were the same street, just different corners. She audited the orphanage ledger until numbers stopped swimming. No contract marriage here, only a contract with conscience, signed in sleepless ink. Every yuan got a purpose: clinic bills, school shoes, roof tar. When the pen slipped, she steadied it with the thought of small hands warming around metal cups of tea. That's how resolve refills itself. Mother Shen caught her swaying by the doorway. "Eat," the elder scolded softly, pressing a bun into Xinyi's palm. "Heroes faint too." A flutter in Xinyi's belly answered. Subtle, unsettling, impossible to name. Accidental pregnancy is an ugly phrase for a holy fear. She tucked it away like a secret letter she wasn't ready to read. 2 days later, the interim deed arrived with a municipal watermark that felt like armor. The kids danced in uneven circles, and someone banged a pot with a spoon until the room forgave the world. Poor Maid, they'd still say. Maybe, but poverty had just lost a round, and it knew it. That night, a long shadow paused at the gate. A silhouette against taxi headlights, the air holding a crisp note of cedar. He didn't enter. He merely watched, as if memorizing the outline of a future he couldn't admit he wanted. Powerful CEO, stranger in the dark, man with a debt to his own conscience. Funny how stories circle back when you think you've outrun them. What Ginny didn't know was that Daylight had a reunion planned, the kind that knocks on your door, wearing a tailored suit and an apology it doesn't quite know how to say. And when fate introduced them by name, everything she'd paid to keep the roof above those beds would start asking for interest of a different kind. The city lobby smelled of glass polish and ambition. Lin Xinyi clutched her portfolio, sketches smudged with late nights, fragile proof that she was more than a poor maid saving scraps. Firefly Group's recruitment banner gleamed above her like a promise she wasn't sure she deserved. Funny, isn't it? How the same building that offers jobs can also house the ghosts of a forbidden night. She stepped into the orientation hall, head down, until the room hushed. Every intern turned as if gravity had shifted. At the far end, framed by marble and authority, stood the man she had sworn never to see again. A powerful CEO, eyes colder than last winter's river, scanning names. For a heartbeat, she thought her chest might betray her and shatter out loud. Mr. He Yanchuan's gaze snagged hers like a hook. No smirk, no recognition, only the kind of stare that strips you bare without lifting a finger. Xinyi's knees remembered the night, the deal, the accidental pregnancy blooming like a secret under her skin. She wanted to run, but contracts, unspoken or otherwise, don't let you leave once signed in silence. Your name? His voice carried across the room, measured steel. "Lin Xinyi," she whispered, though it sounded louder in her head, like a confession. He looked down at his list, then back up, jaw tight. For the rest of the interns, it was protocol. For her, it was Judgment Day dressed in a tailored suit. During the presentation, she felt his eyes on her more than once, flickers of memory tugging at her composure. Was this revenge drama waiting to erupt, or something darker? Fake love, true love blurred under fluorescent lights. She scribbled notes just to keep her hands from shaking. Have you ever pretended to belong in a room that already knows your secrets? When the session ended, he called her name again, this time privately. She followed him into a smaller office, walls lined with jade displays that shimmered like watchful eyes. "We've met," he said, not a question. Xinyi's breath stumbled. "That night," the words died. Shame, pride, survival. They collided until only silence remained. Sometimes silence screams louder than words. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You saved the orphanage with money that came from me. Don't deny it." She flinched, not at the truth, but at the weight of it finally spoken aloud. "I did it for them, not for me," she answered, voice trembling but unbroken. Curiosity flickered in his expression, as though he hadn't expected defiance wrapped in humility. For a long second, the office carried only the tick of an antique clock. Then, softer, "You remind me of someone who refuses to bow to fate." His eyes burned with a mix she couldn't name. Resentment, admiration, something more dangerous. It was the first crack in the armor of a man the world called untouchable. "From this moment," he said finally, "you'll report directly to me. Not an offer, a verdict. Rich versus poor romance often begins with chains disguised as opportunity." She bowed her head, not in submission, but to hide the storm on her face. He'd placed her in his orbit again, and destiny never offers second chances for free. Outside, the interns whispered, envious of her sudden promotion. Mistress or wife, they didn't care about truth, only about proximity to power. Xinyi held her folder tighter, pretending not to hear. Little did they know, she carried not just a title, but a forbidden love child stirring quietly inside her. On her way home, neon lights blurred into rain. She replayed his words, his stare, the undeniable thread binding them. Once she'd thought that night was the end of her dignity. Now it seemed like the beginning of a battle that would test every scar she carried. Love? No, not yet. This was war, written in glances and contracts neither of them could escape. And as she passed the orphanage gate, a small hand tugged her sleeve, asking for a bedtime story. She knelt, smiled through the ache, and began. Once upon a time, a girl stepped into a palace of glass. She didn't finish, because some stories write themselves when the clock strikes again. And the next chapter, well, that was already waiting in the shadows of his office. The nights grew longer, and Lin Xinyi found herself waking with nausea that clung like fog. At first she blamed exhaustion, the endless grind of being more than a poor maid, now an intern, under the sharp gaze of a powerful CEO. But when the symptoms multiplied, the truth whispered back in cruel clarity. A forbidden love child was growing inside her, a secret too heavy for the fragile peace she had built. She sat alone on the narrow cot at the orphanage, clutching the test strip in trembling hands. Tears blurred the tiny mark that confirmed what she already feared. "Why now?" she whispered. But walls don't answer. Have you ever prayed for strength, only to feel the answer weigh twice as much? That's what despair feels like, when love and shame walk in, holding hands. By day, she kept her posture steady, sketching jewelry designs as if nothing stirred beneath her ribs. By night, she fought panic in the bathroom mirror, counting weeks she couldn't afford. Contract marriage. Such things existed in gossip and novels. Not in her world. Yet fate seemed intent on forcing her into roles she never auditioned for. Mistress or wife, neither sounded like salvation. The cruelest thought of all was escape, She traced clinic addresses in the classifieds, each word biting deeper. Accidental pregnancy, they called it, as if life itself could be dismissed like a mistake in ink. Her chest burned at the idea. Could she really end this before it began? Or was that the only mercy left to her? She thought of the children at the orphanage, faces glowing under lamplight as they learned their letters. Would they still look at her with trust if they knew? She thought of Mother Shen, frail but fierce, who would never forgive a choice that killed blood tied to sacrifice. Pride and guilt wrestled in her chest until breathing itself felt like betrayal. One evening, the club manager passed her in the market, eyes sharp with mockery. "Look at you now," he sneered. "An emotional love story in the making. CEO's toy today, orphan girl forever." She walked away, but the words gnawed. What if that was all she would ever be remembered for? Fake love, true love, did it matter when society branded her regardless? Alone in the dormitory bathroom, she pressed her palm to her stomach. "I don't even know what to call you," she whispered to the silence. The room smelled of disinfectant, harsh, unforgiving. Tears slipped, warm against cold tile. If despair had a sound, it was the steady drip of water from a leaking tap, mocking the clock she couldn't rewind. Every glance from Mr. He cut deeper. Did he notice her paler skin, the way her hands lingered protectively near her belly? Once, she caught his eyes soften, then harden again, as if he were choking down questions. She couldn't tell him. Pride kept her tongue still. Pride and the fear that his solution would be worse than her suffering. The decision grew closer each day. At the clinic, the nurse asked in a flat voice, "Are you sure?" Jinyi bit her lip until it bled, nodding though her heart screamed otherwise. Betrayal and redemption, sometimes they live in the same heartbeat. She wanted redemption, but betrayal was the only path she could see. On the way out, the world spun, and she collapsed against a railing. Her secret almost slipped into the open right there, but fate had other plans. A familiar voice called her name, low and unyielding. "Mister." He was there, shadow tall against the fading light. "Why are you here?" he demanded, his tone like thunder trying to mask concern. Her heart stopped, her secret cornered. And in that suspended second, she knew her choice was no longer hers alone. Despair had turned the key, but destiny had just pushed the door wide open. The clinic air still clung to her clothes, sharp with antiseptic and shame. Lin Jinyi tried to steady her breath, but Mr. He's eyes left her nowhere to hide. Powerful CEO, cold as the marble floors he walked on, yet his voice cut differently this time. "You were going to end it," he said, not asking, accusing as if the very thought had betrayed him too. Her lips trembled, words tripping over pride. "I can't raise a child like this. I won't let my baby be born an illegitimate shadow of wealth." Her confession cracked the silence. For a moment, his jaw flexed, fury and something gentler colliding in the same breath. Have you ever seen a man fight his own armor? That's what his stare felt like, iron breaking just enough to let light bleed through. "You think this child is shame?" he demanded. She dropped her gaze, every nerve screaming with humiliation. "No," she whispered. "I think this child deserves more than me." In that moment, poor Maid or orphan girl didn't matter. She was just a woman drowning in choices that cut either way. Curiosity and pity tangled in his silence, and then he moved closer. "I won't allow it," he said finally, voice low, unyielding. "Keep the baby, I'll marry you." The words hit like a verdict, not a vow. A contract marriage, offered not in roses but in rescue, signed in necessity rather than desire. She froze, stunned. "Marriage? You don't even love me." A hollow laugh escaped her lips. "This is madness." "Love isn't the currency here," he answered, each word like measured steel. "Duty is, and power, and protection. My grandmother's wish is to see me wed before she dies. You're carrying my blood. That makes you the best option." Pride burned her cheeks, the words mistress or wife circling like vultures in her head. Was this redemption, or just another cage? Xinyi's heart clenched. She wanted to scream no. She wanted her career, her name built by her own hands, not borrowed rings. "I don't want to be your broodmare," she whispered, eyes stinging. He tilted his head, calm but merciless. "You won't be. You'll be free to work until the child is won. Then I'll give you 1 billion wen and release you." A cruel kind of mercy, a billionaire's bargaining chip. Her fists tightened at her sides. "So, I'm just a contract, a deal on your balance sheet." He leaned in, eyes fierce, closer than breath. "No, you're the mother of my child. That makes you untouchable." Something in his tone, steel wrapped around fire, made her chest ache with a strange mix of relief and resentment. Fake love, true love, sometimes they wear the same mask, don't they? That night she stood in the mirror, trying to picture herself in silk beside him. The reflection looked foreign, a poor maid trapped in a fairy tale with jagged edges. Her hand drifted to her belly, whispering to the tiny life, "Maybe this is the price we pay, so you can be born safe." Love, in its rawest form, is sacrifice carved out of fear. The next morning, the registrar's pen slid across paper, and their names became ink-bound. No kiss sealed it, no ceremony celebrated it. Just silence, thick as judgment. She felt the weight of the ring he pressed into her palm, heavier than gold had any right to be. Around them bureaucrats stamped approvals like fate's rubber seal. Later, he took her to his grandmother, the matriarch with eyes that missed nothing. Xinyi bowed, heart pounding, waiting for rejection. Instead, the old woman's hands clasped hers, warm and trembling. "Take care of him," she said softly, "and he will take care of you." For the first time, the words felt less like a sentence and more like a prayer disguised as advice. As they left, Xinyi glanced at him, searching his face for any sign of regret. All she found was that same impenetrable calm, the armor of a man used to building empires with contracts. And yet, in the glint of his eyes, there was something unspoken, like a promise he didn't know how to give voice to. That silence would haunt her long after the vows no one heard. The He family estate rose like a palace carved from arrogance and old money. Lin Xinyi had seen mansions before, but this was different. Each stone seemed to whisper, "You don't belong here." A poor maid walking through those gates felt like a pawn trespassing on the king's board. And yet, with the contract marriage inked in silence, she had no choice but to cross the threshold. The servants bowed as Mr. He led her inside, but their eyes lingered too long, curious and sharp. Mistress or wife? They didn't dare ask aloud, but their stares did the talking. The air smelled of sandalwood and judgment. Even the marble seemed colder under her feet. Funny how money doesn't just build walls, it teaches them to sneer. In the great hall, Grandmother He waited, small in stature but towering in authority. Her gaze cut through Xinyi's dress, her skin, her soul. "So, you're the girl," the elder murmured, voice frail yet unyielding. Pride swelled in Xinyi's throat, but fear pressed it back down. How do you bow without surrendering your spine? That was the question she had to answer. "Mr." He spoke first, tone steady. "She's my wife. She's carrying my child." Gasps rustled through the relatives gathered like silk rustling against silk. A forbidden love child in the most powerful lineage. That kind of scandal doesn't whisper. It echoes. Xinyi kept her head lowered, hands tight around each other, praying her shaking wasn't visible. Grandmother He's wrinkled hands reached for her. To everyone's shock, she didn't push Xinyi away. Instead, she clasped the younger woman's fingers and said, "You've given me the greatest gift, a chance to meet my great-grandchild before I leave this world." Tears shimmered in the old woman's eyes, a rare crack in the fortress of wealth. Redemption often enters through doors pride forgets to lock, but not everyone welcomed her. Cousins whispered about betrayal and redemption, their voices dripping with venom. "She's here for money," one hissed. "Rich versus poor romance. What a pathetic story," another sneered. The word stung, but Jinyi swallowed them whole, because dignity sometimes means bleeding in silence. Have you ever had to smile while strangers stripped your name bare? At dinner, silver clinked louder than conversation. Each relative tested her, dropping subtle insults masked as polite questions. Which family do you hail from? Where were you educated? Every answer she gave seemed to confirm her unworthiness. Fake love, true love, they didn't care. All they saw was a contract bride, an intruder in designer halls. His jaw tightened each time, but he let the words pass, until one uncle said, "A maid at our table is disgraceful." The CEO's chopsticks hit porcelain, the sound like thunder. "Enough, she's my wife. Question her again, and you question me." Silence drowned the room. Power protects what it claims, even when affection remains hidden in the shadows. Later, alone in a gilded guest room, Xinyi touched the edge of the silk sheets, so unlike her own thin blanket back at the orphanage. The contrast clawed at her heart. Belonging had never felt so impossible. She curled up, whispering to the child within, "They don't want us here, but we'll survive. We always survive." Sacrifice became her lullaby. Through the heavy door, she heard voices, relatives arguing with Mr. He. "She'll ruin us!" "Send her away." His reply was quiet, but razor-sharp. "This is my choice." Strange, isn't it? How conviction sounds louder than shouting. That was the first night she realized he wasn't just powerful. He was dangerous when it came to protecting what he called his own. Grandmother. He entered unannounced, leaning on her cane. "Child," she said softly, "you'll need more than courage here. You'll need patience. Wealth tests people in ways poverty never does." She laid a thin blanket across Xinyi's shoulders, a gesture small yet enormous. For the first time since crossing those gates, Xinyi felt the faintest warmth of acceptance. And still, when the lights dimmed and shadows thickened, whispers returned like ghosts under the door. Rivalry, envy, suspicion, each waiting for their chance to strike. Xinyi closed her eyes, but sleep refused her, because she knew this night wasn't an ending. It was just the opening move in a war of belonging. The office corridors of Firefly glittered with ambition, but Lin Xinyi felt the chill of eyes on her wherever she went. It wasn't the admiration an emotional love story invites. It was suspicion, sharpened by envy. Whispers followed her: poor maid, contract bride, forbidden love child. Labels stuck like thorns, and no matter how she smiled, the sting spread deeper. Among those whispers, one voice rang louder than the rest. Lin Jiwei, the childhood sweetheart everyone thought destined to be the CEO's wife. Elegant, brilliant, polished by years abroad, she embodied everything Xinyi wasn't. "You don't belong here," Jiwei told her once, a smile curved like a blade. "Mistress or wife, it makes no difference. You'll always be beneath us." In meetings, Jiwei turned every suggestion Xinyi made into ridicule. Traditional motifs? Outdated. Your sketches? Amateur. Each word was dipped in venom, disguised as professional critique. Fake love, true love. Jiwei didn't care which rumor stuck, so long as Xinyi's name crumbled under it. Betrayal in the workplace is crueler than gossip on the street. It's dressed in suits and signed with pens. At lunch, the younger interns joined in, emboldened by Jiwei's shadow. They laughed at her second-hand clothes, at the way she carried her lunchbox instead of ordering takeout. "CEO love story?" One scoffed loud enough for her to hear. "More like pity project." Pride burned her cheeks, but she ate in silence. Have you ever swallowed humiliation so bitter it felt like glass? And yet, Mr. He's gaze didn't waver. When others mocked, his silence held weight. His small acts, handing her files directly, asking her opinion in front of the board, felt like shields no one else could see. Jiwei saw them, though, and each glance tightened her fury. Nothing sparks vengeance faster than love you thought was yours, slipping into another's orbit. One evening, Jiwei cornered her near the design lab. "Tell me, do you enjoy parading as his wife? Do you think his affection is real?" Her voice was honey over poison. Xinyi met her eyes, trembling but firm. I don't need to prove anything to you. It was the smallest rebellion, yet it felt like fire. Jiwei's smile vanished, replaced by ice. The rivalry had just turned ruthless. Rumors multiplied overnight. Someone posted online that Xinyi was only chosen for projects because of her contract marriage, because of favors exchanged in secrecy. Screens glowed with accusations, and laughter echoed through the cubicles. Revenge drama doesn't always start with knives. It starts with whispers that cut deeper than steel. Xinyi returned home to the orphanage that night, head low. The children rushed her, tugging her hands, showing off drawings of dragons and phoenixes. Their innocent joy was a balm against the cruelty of adults. "See," Mother Shen said softly, "these little ones don't care about gossip. They care about you." Belonging, fragile and real, wrapped around her heart like armor. The next morning, Jiwei arrived in a silk dress the color of power, sliding her hand into Mr. He's arm in front of everyone. "We've known each other since childhood," she purred to the audience. "He's always trusted me." Xinyi watched, face calm, but inside her pride trembled on the edge of collapse. Rich versus poor romance is always judged in the court of appearances. Later, when the office cleared, Mr. He found her alone, staring at her sketches. "Ignore them," he said, voice steady. She looked up, eyes burning. "Do you even know what they call me? Do you know what it's like to walk through a crowd that spits on your name?" His jaw tightened. He wanted to answer, but the truth was heavier than any comfort he could give. Night fell, and Xinyi lay awake, one hand on her stomach, listening to the faintest flutter. The world outside branded her with cruelty, but inside, a life beat steady, a reminder of why she endured. Rivalry might strip her dignity in public, but in the quiet, love, raw, unglamorous, defiant, kept her standing. And what neither Jiwei nor the others knew was that soon her talent would force its way into the light, whether they welcomed it or not. The boardroom was colder than usual that morning, sunlight slipping through tall glass panes like knives of judgment. Lin Xinyi stood at the far end, clutching sketches that carried her sleepless nights. Around her, polished designers whispered, waiting for her to stumble. A poor maid disguised as a jewelry artist. How long could she pretend? That was the unspoken question circling the table. The CEO's voice cut through the chatter. "Present your concept." Mr. He's tone was steady, but his gaze lingered on her with a quiet weight, as if daring her to hold the room. She swallowed hard, hands trembling against the paper. This was no fairy tale moment. This was survival dressed as opportunity, and failure meant humiliation too heavy to erase. Her rivals smirked. Lin Jiwei leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, already rehearsing her scorn. "Traditional symbols again," she whispered loud enough to be heard. "So predictable." Xinyi's pulse hammered, but she lifted the first design. A killin, mythical, fierce, sacred, etched in jade clouds. "Our culture isn't outdated," she said softly. "It's timeless, and timelessness is luxury." Silence fell. Even the projector hummed louder than the people. Her words cracked the air like a challenge no one expected. Jiwei laughed, but the sound rang brittle. "European aesthetics rule global markets," she snapped. "No client will value such primitive nostalgia." Fake love, true love. It wasn't just about hearts anymore. It was about whose vision the world would choose to follow. Mr. He's gaze sharpened. "On the contrary, our client treasures authenticity over imitation." He leaned forward, tapping Xinyi's sketch. "This maximizes value. It elevates tradition." A murmur spread among the directors. Pride rose in Xinyi's chest, fragile but real. Have you ever felt the ground shift under your feet, not because it collapsed, but because you finally stood taller? The questions rained down next. How would you balance cracks in the jade? What motif unites East and West? Each query struck like arrows, but she met them one by one, hands trembling, voice steady. Sacrifice spoke louder than skill. Every sleepless night, every whispered prayer in the orphanage halls, every humiliation swallowed was now chiseling her into stone that didn't break. By the time she set her final sketch down, the room was quiet again, but not with disdain. This time it was respect, reluctantly blooming. One director even leaned closer, nodding slowly. Jiwei's knuckles whitened around her pen, her pride splitting like glass under pressure. Betrayal and redemption often arrive in the same meeting. Today, redemption was winning by inches. Later, as she packed her drawings, whispers trailed her. Not mockery this time, but curiosity. Maybe she's not just a contract wife. Maybe she has talent after all. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was the first crack in the wall. And sometimes cracks are just new doors pretending not to be. That evening, back at the orphanage, the children gathered around her. She pulled from her bag a broken piece of jade, showing them how flaws can become flowers with the right hands. Even imperfection has value, she told them, smiling through the ache in her chest. Belonging doesn't always come from bloodlines. Sometimes it comes from proving that scars can be beautiful. Alone later, she placed her hand over her stomach, whispering, "Today they saw me. Not the poor maid. Not the contract bride. Me." The child within kicked faintly, as if answering. For the first time in weeks, she let herself imagine a future where shame didn't write the story, where her talent did. But talent draws envy like honey draws wasps. And while she celebrated her small victory, Lin Jiwei's eyes smoldered with fresh hatred. The war was far from over, because in this world, one woman's triumph is often another's declaration of war. The taste of victory was still new on Lin Xinyi's lips when the backlash arrived. Success doesn't come cheap, not in boardrooms where envy is currency. Whispers turned into daggers, slicing through corridors and forums alike. Screens lit with gossip, poor maid, contract wife, forbidden love child. Each word pressed her lower, yet each word proved the rival's hand was moving faster now. Lin Jiwei orchestrated it with precision. At lunch, she dropped hints about Xinyi's mysterious promotion. In meetings, she spoke louder, framing her as undeserving. Her talent, Jiwei laughed in front of colleagues. It's borrowed, like her marriage. Mistress or wife, she mocked, didn't matter. The implication was clear. Xinyi was nothing but an imposter draped in another's power. The online forums erupted soon after. A post claimed Xinyi had seduced the CEO during a forbidden night and tricked him into a contract marriage. Photos were doctored, comments cruel. Accidental pregnancy. The words repeated like venom, spreading shame as if it were truth. Betrayal and redemption. They were twisting, pulling her into a storm she hadn't chosen. In the office, colleagues stared as if she carried sin in her hands. No one sat near her. No one shared a smile. Even the interns she once helped avoided her desk. It was as though her very presence was a stain. Pride cracked beneath the weight, but she swallowed the bitterness. You ever felt so alone in a crowded room, it felt like drowning in silence? One evening, Jiwei cornered her by the elevator. "Do you really think you can win here?" she hissed, eyes blazing. "You're a shadow, Xinyi, a fake love pretending to be true, and soon he'll see it too." The doors opened before Xinyi could answer, but the venom lingered, echoing in her chest like a curse too sharp to shake. Not satisfied with rumors, Jiwei turned to darker tactics. A contractor was bribed to cut corners on a project Xinyi oversaw. When the prototype cracked, blame fell on her shoulders. In meetings, Jiwei's voice rose sweet and cruel. "She's reckless, dangerous, not fit for design." Even when evidence showed tampering, suspicion clung to Xinyi's name like oil that wouldn't wash away. At home, she began to falter. Nights stretched with tears, muffled in pillows, hands trembling over her growing belly. Sacrifice for the child meant enduring pain she could never explain. She whispered lullabies in the dark, promising the life inside her that they would survive this storm. But promises feel fragile when the world is set on breaking you. It wasn't just career they targeted. It was her safety. One rainy night, on her way from the office, a car swerved too close, forcing her against a wall. Tires screamed, lights vanished, and she stood, shaking, heart racing. Revenge drama was no longer whispers. It had claws now, and they aimed not just to humiliate, but to destroy. Mister. He noticed the changes, the hollow eyes, the way she jumped at shadows. "What's going on?" he asked one night, voice low. She shook her head, afraid pride would spill into tears if she spoke. He narrowed his gaze, fury simmering. Powerful CEOs don't take kindly to attacks on what they claim as theirs. But he held his silence, for now, watching, calculating. Meanwhile, Jiwei basked in her victories, whispering into every ear that would listen. "She'll crack soon. It's only a matter of time." Yet envy blinds the cleverest rivals. Jiwei didn't see that pain can forge strength and despair can plant the seed of defiance. Xinyi's spine was bending, yes, but it hadn't broken. And as one more rumor spread, as one more scheme tightened the noose, Xinyi stared at herself in the mirror, hand over her child. Her eyes no longer begged for pity. They burned with something new. Because every betrayal eventually sharpens the blade of redemption, and Jiwei had just handed her the whetstone. The storm had stretched too long, its echoes too loud. But storms, no matter how fierce, eventually break. Lin Xinyi stood in the conference hall, eyes lowered, heart hammering. Rumors still burned like wildfire, mistress or wife, fake love or true. Colleagues watched, half expecting her collapse. Yet what they didn't know was that the tide had already begun to turn. Mr. Yanchuan entered with the gravity of a verdict. His presence silenced whispers before he spoke. Powerful CEO, untouchable in every sense, and yet that day his eyes were fixed only on her. "Enough," he said, voice cold as steel. "Lin Xinyi is not a rumor. She is my wife." Gasps rippled across the hall. Words that once belonged to secrecy were now a banner raised high. Jiwei's face blanched, her last weapon snatched from her hand. She tried to protest, but his glare cut her mid-breath. "Betrayal has no place in my company," he declared, "and envy will never overshadow true merit." In one stroke, her schemes lay bare. Redemption tastes sweetest when it's spoken by the very lips that once withheld it. Xinyi trembled, not from shame, but from the weight of being seen, finally, publicly, undeniably. A poor maid no more, an orphan girl no longer hidden. She was his choice, his vow, his truth. Have you ever felt dignity return like oxygen, filling every vein until you almost weep from relief? That was the moment she breathed free. The applause began hesitantly, then grew into thunder. Some clapped out of duty, others out of awe. But for Xinyi, it wasn't the sound that mattered. It was the quiet pressure of his hand at her back, steady and sure. Contract marriage had become something else, something that pulsed with real fire. Fake love had grown into true. Later, in the hospital room where she recovered from stress and bruises of rivalry, he brought her soup, awkward but tender. "You've suffered enough," he murmured. She smiled faintly, whispering, "We survived." The child within stirred as if echoing them both. Forbidden love child. No, this was a child born of endurance, sacrifice, and love that defied walls of pride. The wealthy relatives, once cruel, softened when grandmother He proclaimed, "This girl carries our blood and our future. Respect her, or leave this house." Authority sealed her place more firmly than titles ever could. Jiwei, stripped of influence, walked out in silence, another chapter closed by her own bitterness. At the orphanage, children crowded around Xinyi, eyes bright with pride. "She's on TV!" they shouted, pointing at the news broadcast that showed her standing beside the CEO. Mother Shen squeezed her hand, whispering, "See? Sacrifice was never in vain." Belonging wrapped her at last, not borrowed, not begged, earned. That evening, under the soft glow of lanterns in the He estate garden, he finally spoke what duty had long hidden. "Xinyi, I never wanted just a contract. I wanted you." His words broke through her walls, pride and fear melting into something stronger. "Then take me as I am," she whispered, "not as your charity, but as your equal." Love, in its truest form, had arrived. He kissed her hand with reverence, eyes glimmering with the promise of tomorrow. Around them, the night carried no rumors, only silence that felt like peace. Their story had been written in pain, but rewritten in defiance. And now, with every scar, every sacrifice, they stood not as fragments but as whole. Because in the end, betrayal couldn't bury them, envy couldn't break them, and pride couldn't silence them. Theirs was an emotional love story that rose from ashes, a rich versus poor romance turned into a testament of endurance. And as he drew her close, whispering, "Forever," Lin Xinyi finally believed that love, stubborn and relentless, had truly conquered all. In the end, it wasn't the mansion, the title, or the fortune that defined them. It was the storm they survived together. The maid who once bowed her head now stood with grace unshaken. The CEO who once spoke with arrogance now listened with humility. And between them, a child whose laughter silenced every cruel whisper that dared to follow. What was once shame became honor. What was once a contract became a covenant. And what the world called weakness revealed itself as unshakable strength. They had been broken, judged, and nearly destroyed. But love, quiet, stubborn, defiant love, became the fire that rebuilt them from ashes. This is more than just a story of romance. It's a testimony that no title, no wealth, no cruel judgment can erase the truth of the heart. Sometimes the most fragile souls carry the loudest courage, and sometimes the greatest victories are born in the shadows of our deepest pain. So when you remember this tale, don't remember the lies told about her or the pride that blinded him. Remember the legacy they built. A maid who became a mother, a CEO who became a man, and a love that turned scandal into salvation. Because in the end, the hardest battles always give birth to the most unforgettable miracles.